Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we're going to be returning to the subject of setting up your QNAP NAS just right, perfectly, the very first time. In part 1 of this series we went through the physical setup, creating our storage pools, looking a little bit about what you can do with M.2 NVMe's, and having the system right, start building your storage. In part 2 of this series we're going to be looking at user account creation, user account control, creating areas of shared storage, and installing applications and services. Now, along the bottom of the screen, you're going to see several chapters denoting each step in this process. But I will highlight that all of the steps in today's video do not necessarily need to be done in this order for reasons that will become clear later on, because we're going to be creating an area of storage, installing apps and services, and creating users. And sometimes it's going to be easier to do those in a different order depending on your setup. I'm starting with user account creation, but you can skip ahead and go back and forth using those chapters as needed. So, first and foremost, going into the control panel, we can create our brand new user. We've already logged in with a system with what is traditionally referred to as a power user. Now, although this isn't a strict super user, such as a root or admin, the user account I've created at the beginning of this process has quite a lot of credentials and quite a lot of power. And if these login credentials fell into the wrong hands, that could be utilized for a huge amount of damage to your system and your data. Therefore, depending on the accessing user and the priority of their access and the application you're going to use, it's recommended that you create sub-users with varying levels of power to ensure increased security and lowering potential attack vectors on your QNAP NAS. Now, on the QNAP NAS, it's recommended for your individual users to first head into the Users tab just down here. Select Users, and then from there, you're going to see that the admin user has been disabled. Let's move that slightly away from my head on camera. You've got the user account, the admin account disabled, which is a security measure, and the admin account I've created with the slightly moody admin name still there with plenty of power. Now, for an average user, before we create any, if you want to change those security credentials, you can adapt them here, where you can change their password, change the user account profile, change the group that they're in, as well as changing the access they've got to data, and of course, account privileges. You can even change them here at the top on any user account, and I know my face is somewhat in the way here, but you can go ahead and change those preferences. But let's create ourselves a brand new user. Select Create up here. Then select Create a User. Remember, you can create multiple users in one swoop if you choose, but for now, let's create one user. This user, we're going to call them Alan. Now, user Alan, we're going to give them a password. We can go ahead and not bother creating a password for them if we choose, but that isn't really recommended. You can give them a picture if you wish. You can connect a mobile telephone number if you connect with an SMS service. You can even add email addresses and more. Within this single window, you can create everything for this user that you're going to need. Now, we're going to go into creating shared folders shortly and creating user groups and accessing and installing permissions later on. But from here, you can choose if you wish, if you've got multiple groups, and we'll go on to that in a moment there. You can go ahead if you've created multiple shared areas of storage, say whether they've got read-only access, read and write access, which means they can access, upload, delete and modify data, or completely deny them any access or visibility to that area of storage if you choose. Finally, come out of that, if we're going to go with read and write for our Alan user, we can go ahead moving down, finally into the application tab, where once you've installed different apps and services, you can decide if our user Alan has access to them. And this means if you only want them to have access to the backup tool, if you only want this user to have access to multimedia, you can assign that there. When you're ready, click Create. And now we've created our brand new user. Now, sometimes you're going to be adding lots of users, and as mentioned, you can choose if you wish to create a multiple user a routine here. So you can add the username prefix user, for example. Then say you want to start at number 1, and then after that, say I want 5 users. From there, give them all the same password if you choose, or give them unique passwords to modify later. And then from there, you can go ahead, click Next, and it will create those individual users. Those individual users can then allow them to have permission to change their own default password, or that they have to change it the very first time they log in moving forward. And you can choose to disable that account after a certain period of time if you wish, so you can ensure that a user account doesn't go wild or get used later on when you want to make sure, without having to keep an eye on it, that that account will be deleted. So as you can see, we've now created 5 individual users. It's as simple as that. Now, those individual users you'll create for your home or business, maybe family members, you probably want to put them into groups. The reason being that, again, some people you might want to only allow them access to watch movies, but others you might want to back up their photos, back up their data. So for those users, you can go ahead and go into groups, and then from here, create brand new user groups. In these groups, you can assign privileges and access that are locked to that group, and then move users in and out to ensure, for example, that a user that you once gave plenty of access to your system data and apps to is suddenly moved along to have less power if you choose. Click create that new group. Let's call these ones backups. And this backups user group, we can go ahead and choose which users. So we're going to put users 4 and 5 into this group. And that allows us to now make sure that those users are going to have access to only the shared folders that we want them to have access to. But moreover, we can choose that these users have no access whatsoever, or at the very least they can see and access data, but they can't modify it and write further data to it if we choose, depending on which one of those we pick. So now we've created our new user group for backups, and for that user account for backups, we can tailor what access we want to give them. But what about the reverse? What if you need to give an individual user more power on the fly? Let's go back to Alan. Now, Alan here, if we choose, we can actually give this user more power on the fly. We can delegate them a lot more power very, very quickly if we choose to. We can go in, modify their settings and account and user creation and data, but moreover from that, we can change a lot of their two-step verification by force. We can change a lot of their access within the system by force, all of which can happen very easily on the fly. And remember, you can modify that on the top right if you choose to. Now, what about when you want to create those shared areas of storage? Remember, as you add more shared areas of storage, they can be assigned to different users as well. So when we look at the file station here, we'll see there's that folder that we've been addressing so far, the public folder that's created automatically when you set up your areas of storage on your QNAP NAS there. It creates default folders, and if you're using QUTS, it creates even more folders there. But what if we want to create more? Because remember, just because you've got your area of storage on the NAS, it doesn't necessarily mean that your devices, your phones, your tablets, your connected PCs and Mac users can access it. That's where we create shared folders. If we go into our shared folder space and we click share and we click shared folder, that allows us to create our new area of storage on here. We're going to call this one media. Now, our media folder, later on in this video series, we're going to start using that for our multimedia, for Plex Media Server and more. But this area here, we choose where in the system we want it. So if we've created multiple storage pools, do watch the previous video for more information on that, and we've created multiple volumes, we can choose and assign where we want this to live, whether we've got faster SSDs or hard drives. So from there, we can go ahead and choose if we wish, for example, to add encryption to this. And that encryption will allow that data, once it's in there, to be locked with that encryption key to stop users having access to this shared folder with unauthorized levels of access. If you're using the ZFS QUTS platform from QNAP, there is another option there for write once, read many, or worm. And that allows you to have an area of storage that once you create it and data goes in, it cannot be deleted either for a certain period of time or only by an admin. And that allows you to have legacy protected data. Unfortunately, that is a highfalutin application service that is not available on QTS. But for now, click next. And as you can see, there's all of our users from earlier on. So rather than creating the user and then assigning them the access to the space, as you create more space, you can go ahead and on the fly decide, for example, that you want Alan to have read-write access. and you want users 1, 2 and 3 to have read-write access, but users 4 and 5, we can say that they've only got read-only access. Those users can see the data, they can open the data on their local machine, but they can't edit it or add more data. Click Next. From there, we can then decide whether we want the guest account that you can create on the fly to have access, whether you want to hide it from a network drive, more on that later, and there's more options that are more specific to different operating systems and file systems. More on that later in another video. But for now, go ahead and click Finish. It will also create this new folder for us, and it will list it on multimedia apps. More on that in our multimedia video coming up, I believe, in part 4 or part 5. But now we've created this new shared folder, we can talk about what we can do with it. If you want to add data to the NAS, there's 3 ways to do it. Number 1, click Upload, and then from there select if you want to upload an entire folder or just a file. So for example, if we go in and select some files here, we can select a bunch of files, and now they'll be uploaded to the NAS. We can decide whether we want them to replace names with the same files with the same name, duplicate them, or keep both copies. We're now uploading some random files here onto our QNAP NAS, and you can see with the task manager at the top that they're all being sent over, and as they're just photos, it's been very, very quick indeed. And then from there we can just open them up here in a new tab, and later on when we start looking at different apps and services that we install on our QNAP NAS for photography, for music, for multimedia, we can then use tailored access to those apps and services easily and quickly. But other ways to upload data into the system are as follows. So for example, if we go back in to our system here and we select ourselves some more data and we go for images, so we'll take these 3 images here, we can drag them into that window. We see the same option for if we want to overwrite, maintain or create clones of the data, and as you can see, it's now going to upload the new data onto our NAS. There is our new data there at the bottom we've added there, and if you choose, we can adapt how we see the data here. We can go ahead, if we choose for example to access and see the data here on the right, and add more variables for accessing and seeing how the data is being displayed for us there. Now, what about if you want to access the contents of your NAS locally? You want to utilize your own file manager for Windows, for Mac Finder, or even third-party Linux such as Ubuntu. For that, you need to create a mapped network drive. And again, in part 3 of this series, we're going to be going through other ways and means to synchronize your data, such as utilizing QSync and utilizing iSCSI LUNs, both of which have their own advantages and disadvantages with seeing the contents of your NAS but outside of the NAS. But mapping network drives is by far the simplest, but it does have disadvantages, something we'll touch on later and in the next video. Now, to map a network drive, depending on your OS, there's lots of different ways to do it. For example, on a Windows system, you can just select the Network tab, and the Network tab will display all NAS devices in the local area network and their shared folders, traditionally utilizing something called SMB. As you see, there is our QNAP NAS. We can double click it, we enter our login credentials. Remember, we have to make sure we use a user account that we've created that actually has permission to access this folder, as we see here. Click OK, and there is our media folder we created earlier on, and inside that media folder you'll be able to see the content of that data, all of which there's our public folder that we dumped that data into earlier on, all of it accessible and visible via Windows Explorer. But if you're not able to see the NAS on the network, or you're using a file folder manager on your operating system of choice, head back into the QFinder application we talked about in the previous video. Find your NAS, right click, and then select Network Drives, and it will check via the network protocol there. Click OK, and then you have to enter once again the credentials that have access to the shared folder you want to use. Click Remember My Credentials if you want that long term. Otherwise, every time you reboot the system, you will have to re-add all of those details depending on your own security setup. And once again, as you see there, there's our mappable network drives. And you simply need to right click and then select the option Map Network Drive. Give it a letter. In this case, I will give it the letter Q for QNAP. Click Finish, and boom. Now on this computer, there's my local OS drive. But now we've got access to that public folder there. And from that public folder, we can go ahead and access the contents of the NAS natively without utilizing any of the QNAP user interface via the web browser or the mobile apps. However, as mentioned, mapped network drives aren't the perfect way to do it. They're by far the easiest way to do it, and a lot of users, not really taking advantage of the full extent of what their NAS is capable of, will often use mapped network drives for the whole system, rather than using some more integrated and more tailored approaches. Again, I mentioned earlier on that you can use an application known as QSync. If you go into the Application Center on your QNAP NAS, then select the option for Backup and Sync, look for the option known as QSync Central. This is an application that you can install on your desktop or mobile device, and it will allow you to create a much more seamless and on-demand synchronization, something of which we're going to go into way more detail on in part 3 of this video series. But for this video, just to show you how easy it is to install apps, you simply need to select the app you want to install and click Install. If you have multiple storage pools and volumes on your system, then it will ask you which one of them you want to install the app on. So if you're going to be utilizing a faster area of storage and you want apps such as those for virtualization or more to live on those, you can choose to install those apps and their services on the faster area of storage there. The same goes with the ability to install lots of different apps and services for your needs, and you can search and add them very easily. But there you go, that is how we create individual users, manage user account control, allow access to different areas of shared storage and different applications on your QNAP NAS safely, as well as how to install those applications and create your areas of shared storage as easily as possible. Again, in part 3 of this series, we will be looking at backup and synchronization and going into a greater degree of detail on just how you can establish those pathways and those more specialized areas of storage on your local PC, Mac, iOS or Android or Linux systems, as well as on the NAS, create dedicated larger scale areas of storage that, unlike a mapped network drive, will allow significantly better, smoother and more capable areas of storage on your local system, with options such as file on demand, file pinning and file streaming. So stay tuned for part 3. But if you need further assistance in the meantime, I strongly recommend one of the following. As mentioned in my other video, you can go ahead on NAS Compares and take advantage of both the free advice section and the NAS Builder on the right hand side of the page. On top of that, when utilizing the free advice section, we have links to lots of recommended third-party forums and first-party support forums to help you with your network attached storage device there. If the 3 to 5 working day time on free advice, because we do get a lot of free advice inquiries come through, isn't quick enough for you, there's an expedited support option over on Ko-Fi, as well as Ask.NAS Compares support forum if you need it. Alternatively, via Ko-Fi, you can contact us with that expedited support directly and with Patreon. Alternatively, use our Zoom consultation option where me or Eddie can jump on a Zoom call with you and talk you through your storage needs, requirements and recommendations. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.